We shall commence this module by discussing tariffs. Tariffs, one of the most common and widely used instruments of commercial policy, have been used by the countries with the twin objective of providing protection to the domestic industry against the foreign competition and generating income for the country. In the globalized world, tariffs have become one of the most important tools of international trade policies and most debatable objects in economic policies under various international economic agreements. In this module, we will discuss various types of tariffs, problems of measurement and their effects. First, we will discuss partial equilibrium analysis and then we will analyze the general equilibrium analysis of tariffs by relaxing some assumptions. After studying this module, you shall be able to appreciate the meaning of various types and effects of tariffs, explain the general equilibrium analysis of tariff, arguments against and in favor of imposing tariff and their implications, the domestic market failure argument for a tariff. Now we will discuss the various types of tariffs. There are various types of tariffs depending upon the ways of imposing objective or retaliation. Specific tariffs are levied as a fixed charge for each unit of goods imported, for example rupees 400 per unit. When the duty is imposed on the basis of the value of the product measured by their price, they are termed ad valorem tariff. Sometimes countries impose different rates of duty depending upon the foreign economic policy or relations and agreements. This type of tariff is called discriminatory tariff. For example, India imposes high rates of tariffs on goods coming from, say, European Union and lower rates of duty on goods imported from South Asian Association of Regional Countries or say the SAARC countries. Revenue tariffs are imposed on generating revenue for the economy. However, in commercial policy, tariff is meant for providing protection to the indigenous industries from foreign competition and they are called protective tariffs. There are various types of tariffs such as retaliatory tariff and countervailing tariff. When a country X imposes or increases the duties against the goods imported from country Y, it is possible that country Y retaliates and levies duty on goods imported from country X. Country Y's tariffs are then called retaliatory tariffs. On the other hand, tariffs are said to be countervailing when a country imposes import duties with a view to offset export subsidy in the country of origin. For example, India imposes duty on Chinese products because India observes that China may use predatory dumping or provide the export subsidies to their exporters, supplying goods to India. The countervailing duties are mainly aimed at wiping out unfair due advantage given by the export subsidies in the foreign country. Now moving on to the effects of tariff, that is partial equilibrium analysis. First we will analyze here the effects of tariff in case of small country and single commodity, and later we will broaden our view by taking two countries and derive the import demand curve and export supply curve, and then we will discuss the effects of tariff. The case 1, small country. When a small country imposes tariff on its imported goods, it does not affect the price of the commodity in the rest of the world. The effect of the tariff is explained with the help of this diagram. D and S curves are domestic demand and domestic supply curves of the commodity. OP1 represents the world price at which the foreign producers are ready to supply and amount of the commodity in the domestic market. Thus, P1F, which is perfectly elastic, becomes the supply curve of the imports. Thus, under free trade, that is before imposing a tariff, the equilibrium is achieved at F, at which domestic demand curve and foreign supply curve intersect each other. The total demand for good is OQ4, out of which OQ1 is supplied by domestic producers and rest Q1, Q4 is supplied by foreign producers. Now suppose the country decides to import specific tariff on the imported commodity by P1, P2. Since the tariff imposing country is small, it does not affect the foreign export price. The tariff simply increases the price of the imported goods by the full amount of the tariff As a result, the price of the commodity increases by the P1, P2 and the new price is OP2. Thus, P1, P2 is the price effect of the tariff. After imposition of tariff, the equilibrium composition point moves from F to C. Because of increase in price, domestic demand falls from OQ4 to OQ3 and domestic supply increases from OQ1 to OQ2. The new domestic production equilibrium is at D. The total demand of good imported is reduced from Q1, Q4 to Q2, Q3. Protective or production effect. The protective effect of tariff is measured by increase in domestic supply of the good after the tariff is imposed. In the figure, we can see that after tariff Q1, Q2 measures the protective or production effect. When price increases from OP1 to OP2, the domestic producers are able to cover rising marginal cost and they expand their production. Producer surplus is increased by area P1, P2, DE. Consumption effect. The consumption effect shows that after levying the tariff, the consumption of goods decreases because of increase in price. There is a net loss of consumer surplus. In the figure, we can see that before tariff, the consumption or demand for good was OQ4. But after tariff, the consumption decreases from OQ4 to OQ3. And loss of consumer surplus is area P1, P2, CF. The combined production and consumption effect is called trade effect. Reduction in consumption Q3, Q4 and increase in production Q1, Q2 results in lower imports. Imports shrink from Q1, Q4 to Q2, Q3. The revenue effect. The revenue effect is the revenue earned by the government by the tariff imposed, that is P1, P2 multiplied by Q2, Q3. The area of rectangular ABCD is the revenue effect. Redistribution effect. The redistribution effect results from producers receiving high price after imposing the tariff. This is shown in the figure by the area P1, P2, DE. This amount is a surplus over production cost accruing to the domestic supplier. In this sense, producers gain a surplus P1, P2, DE out of the loss of consumer surplus due to consumption effect, which is P1, P2, CF. Out of the balance loss of consumer surplus, the amount shown by the area ABCD accrues to the government as revenue, and the net loss of consumer surplus is represented by the two triangles EAD and FCB. This loss of consumer surplus is neither transferable to producers nor to the government and is called deadweight loss of the tariff. Balance of payment effect. Tariff has a favorable balance of payment effect by reducing imports in the tariff imposing country. Balance of payment effect is shown in this figure. Before tariff, the country was importing Q1, Q4 amount of the commodity at a price OP1, and the total value of import is represented by the area of rectangle Q1, EF, Q4. This represents the payments to the foreign products. As a result of the tariff, total import is reduced from Q1, Q4 to Q2, Q3. So, payment to the exporting country is reduced to Q2, AB, Q3, which improves the balance of payment at the same time. The government gets revenue equal to ABCD. Now, coming to the case of large country. Now, we will take example of two countries in which a country's economy is large enough that it can affect the world price of the imported goods by imposing the tariff on it. Two countries are home and foreign, and we assume that home country is an importer and foreign country is the exporter of the good. First, we will derive home import demand curve and foreign export supply curve with the help of the domestic demand and supply curves. Home import demand is excess of what home consumers demand over what home producers supply, and foreign export supply is the excess of what foreign producers supply over what foreign consumers demand. Home country's import demand curve is derived in figure. In panel A, D and S curves are home country's demand and supply curves respectively. At price P1, home consumers demand D1 while home producers are able to supply only Q1. So, home import demand is D1 minus Q1. When prices increase from P1 to P2, home demand decreases to D2, while domestic supply increases to Q2 and consequently import demand falls to D2 minus Q2. These price and quantity combinations are plotted in panel B, which shows that the import demand curve is downward sloping. As price of the good increases, import demand falls. At the price OP3, domestic demand is equal to supply, so import demand is 0. In the same manner, foreign supply of export is derived in figure 3. D and S curves are foreign demand and supply curves respectively. At the price P1, there is no export supply because demand for good is equal to the supply. When price increases to OP2, demand falls and supply increases. The total supply available is Q2 D2 and this point is shown as point 2 in panel B of figure. At the price OP3, the supply available for export is Q3 D3 and the point 3 in panel B shows this. The export supply curve XS is positively sloped, which shows the positive relationship between price and exported goods. Word equilibrium is attained when home import demand is equal to foreign export supply. Figure 4 shows this equilibrium at point E. Now we will examine the effect of tariff imposed by the home country. Figure explains the effect of a specific tariff rupees T per unit of the commodity. In the absence of the tariff, word demand and word supply would be equalized at the point of intersection, that is point 1 in panel B, at the equilibrium word market price P1. The foreign exporter will not be willing to supply the commodity from foreign to home unless the price in home country exceeds the price in foreign by at least the amount of tariff imposed. In this case, there will be excess demand for goods in home and excess supply in foreign country. Thus, price will rise in home and fall in foreign country until the price difference equals tariff imposed. When home country imposes tariff, it drives a wedge between the prices in two markets. The tariff raises the price in home to PT and lowers the price in foreign to PF. PT minus T. Because of increase in price, consumers in home country demand less and home producers supply more and hence fewer imports are demanded. As we can see in the figure that there is movement from point 1 to point 2 on the MD curve. Similarly, lower price in foreign leads to increase in demand and decrease in supply as seen in the move from point 1 to 3 on XS curve. Thus, the volume of trade declines from QW to QT. The increase in the price at home from P1 to PT is less than the amount of the tariff because part of the tariff is reflected in a decline in foreign export price and is not passed to the home consumers fully. We shall now understand the effect of tariff, that is a general equilibrium analysis. We will analyze the general equilibrium in two cases. First, we will discuss in case of small country which cannot affect its terms of trade. Then we will take example of a large country, a tariff in a small country. Now assume that a country that produces and consumes two goods X and Y. We also assume here that the country is small and unable to affect its terms of trade. It exports goods X and imports good Y. The country exports X to the world market at the given word prices Px and imports Y at a given word price Py. Figure illustrates the situation of these countries in case of free trade without tariff. Equilibrium production is at point E1 where the terms of trade line slope, that is minus Px upon Py, is tangent to the production possibility frontier. The terms of trade line is also the country's budget line. The consumption equilibrium is at E2 where the budget line is tangent to the highest possible indifference curve at E2. The difference in production and consumption gives free trade equilibrium. Amount E1G of good X is exported and E2G of good Y is imported at the ruling terms of trade. Now suppose the government imposes the ad valorem tariff T. Now the price of goods Y increases to Py into 1 plus T. The budget line becomes flatter with a slope Px divided by Py upon 1 plus T with a minus sign before it. The effect of tariff is straightforward. As a result of fall in relative price of good X, the country produces less of X while producing more of Y. In figure 7, this shift in production is shown by the movement of the production point from E1 in figure 6 to F in figure 7. To conclude, we can say that the country produces less of its export goods and more of its imported goods. Consumption is also distorted. In general, the precise effect of tariff on consumption depends on exactly how the government spends the tariff revenue. If the government returns this revenue to the consumers, the budget constraint of consumers is not in line with the slope minus Px upon Py into 1 plus T that passes through the point Q2. Consumers can spend more than the income received from production of goods. Their income is the sum of tariff revenue collected by the government plus income generated by producing goods. However, consumer will not choose the point on the new budget constraint at which the constraint is tangent to an indifference curve. The tariff causes them to consume less of Y and more of X because of change in relative prices. This is explained in figure. The point of consumption after the tariff is imposed is shown by E3. It is situated on new budget constraints but on the indifference curve that is tangent to a line with slope minus Px upon Py multiplied by 1 plus T. This line is above the line with the same slope that passes through the production point F. Welfare effect of tariff. Loss of welfare due to inefficient production and consumption. Both exports and imports are reduced. Consumption equilibrium is on a lower indifference curve. Tariff in a large country. Now we examine the case of a large country with the help of offer curves. Offer curve, also known as reciprocal demand curve, developed by Mill, Edgeworth and Marshall. The offer curve of a country determines the relative commodity price at which trade takes place. It shows the various quantities of its exportable commodity a country is willing to exchange for an importable commodity at various international prices. Consider that there are two countries home which export X and imports Y with the country foreign. OF shows the offer curves of the foreign country while OH1 is the offer curve of the home country in the absence of tariff. The equilibrium is attained at point A where OF and OH1 intersect each other. Now suppose that home imposes a tariff. Because of that, home now offer curves is OH2 and it cuts OF at point B. The terms of trade improves because Px upon Py2 is greater than Px upon Py1. Although tariff improves the terms of trade of the country, yet its effect on international trade is unambiguous. It leads to shrinkage in the volume of international trade. Let us now discuss the argument for tariffs. Free trade ensures maximum volume of trade, gross national product and welfare from a global perspective. The arguments for tariff, on the other hand, are based on different grounds, many of which are non-economic. These are often based on nationalist, political, strategic grounds. Several political economists favor tariff in the interest of the country because of many reasons. These are as follows. Pauper labor argument or counteracting foreign low wages argument. Several economists from developed countries argue in favor of tariff imposition because imported goods from developing countries are cheap because of low wages there. For example, United States imposed tariff on the textile products imported from Mexico and other Latin American countries. Wages in these countries are very low as compared to United States. Infant industry argument, according to which tariffs provide shield against foreign competition to the domestic producers. Just as an infant needs parental protection during its early stages of growth, the infant industries need tariff protection during their early stages of establishment and growth. Anti-dumping or retaliation argument for tariff is a defensive action against a foreign country. These days, predatory dumping is common with a view to devastate the indigenous producers from the market. National self-sufficiency argument to reduce dependency on imports. Industrialization or diversification of industries argument. Another argument advanced in support of protection is to diversify the domestic production of goods. It means that there should be a balanced growth of the economy so that all the sectors of the economy develop side by side. For this purpose, agriculture and manufacturing industries should be protected from competition. This is a valid argument, as experience has shown that countries which are not developed in a balanced way are affected more by international economic disturbances such as crop failure, depression and inflation. Therefore, they should diversify and become self-sufficient by protecting their industries. Revenue argument as the most appropriate for developing countries. Capital or revenue is the most essential factor for development in the developing countries. When developing countries open their market for the rest of the world, multinational corporations rush to exploit the new opportunities. The markets of the developing countries are flooded with the imported goods and thereby create an important avenue for the government to raise the revenue through tariffs. This revenue is meant for developmental expenditure. Balance of payment argument. Developing countries are having persistent deficit in their balance of payments either because of huge import bill or unfavorable terms of trade. To correct this, these countries need hefty amount of capital. Therefore, imposing tariff becomes one of the most important sources of revenue for the developing countries. The optimum tariff argument. This is discussed in next unit on tariffs. Domestic distortions arguments. This argument for the tariff is based on the fact that the domestic factor and the commodity market in an economy do not work under fully competitive conditions. Rather, there are market failures or imperfections in these markets which lead to domestic distortions. Market failures are due to monopolies, the problem of externalities, wage differentials, trade unions and government regulations. The basic idea is that when distortions exist in the economy which prevent it from operating under perfectly competitive conditions, the government should use a tariff to cancel partially the effect of such distortions. This principle is based on the policy of second best. Strategic trade policy argument. This argument is based on the high technology industries in developed countries which need protection against foreign countries. It is argued that modern industries in the field of information technology, telecommunication, etc. are capital intensive, research and developing oriented, high risk oriented, lead to large external economies and have high growth prospects for the country. They therefore are required to be protected in order to have comparative advantage over other competing industries. Thus, this argument is similar to infant industry argument for LDCs. Let us now summarize what we have learnt in this module. Tariffs, one of the most common and widely used instruments of commercial policy, have been used by the countries with the twin objectives of providing protection to the domestic industry against the foreign competition and generating income for the country. There are various types of tariffs depending upon the ways of imposing objectives or retaliation. Specific tariffs are levied as a fixed charge for each unit of good imported. When The duty is imposed on the basis of the value of the product measured by their price. They are termed ad valorem tariff. Effects of tariff in case of small country and large country, a partial and general equilibrium analysis has been discussed. Free trade ensures maximum volume of trade, gross national product and welfare from global perspective. The arguments for tariff on the other hand are based on different grounds, many of which are non-economic. These are often based on nationalist, political and strategic grounds.